Excellent. So this too, I think this will go probably 45 minutes, maybe a little less today. A lot of for the next 3 weeks, a lot of the standards people already know, right? So they're sort of more common sense standards. They don't have anything hidden practices or something you might not have heard before. So these we are moving into standard 44. And standard 44, the next couple of standards are going to be all about grading, grade books, grading, expectations of grading, feedback, rubrics, all kinds of examples. So it's really revolves around the idea of grading online. And so here's our first. So the grading here. So course grading policies, including consequences of late submission, are clearly stated in the course information syllabus area. So that's really straightforward. And we're going to talk about sort of the details of what that means. But a lot of these practices you're doing. So I'm going to play this little video.
Students need to know exactly how they're being graded and how they're being, not only how they're being graded, but what the consequences are of any late assignments, due dates, everything right from the get-go. You have to remember that we're not seeing these students visually on a day-to-day basis. Students are logging in at all times of the day, at any time during the week. They need to know right from the start, in black and white, this is what's expected of me. This is how I'm going to be graded. This is what's going to happen if I don't adhere to these policies. I have a black and white grading policy that I keep, that I put right into my syllabus or course information documents. Students are expected to read that during our introductory week or first few days or whatever, that first initial week of the semester. I also include a course information quiz where they have to answer certain questions that tell me you've either read it or you haven't read it. I also include a little quiz that says where they have to acknowledge I have read the course grading policies and understand the late assignment policy. So they actually have to read that and give me a answer saying I read it, I understand it. So that tells me also that they've read it, they understand those policies. So I include that right in the introductory activities in my course so that I have an understanding that, okay, well, maybe you thoroughly don't understand it, but at least you looked at it. So I can at least be assured that they've taken the time to look at it. And hopefully everything is sunk in for them. And then I'll reiterate in the first couple of weeks, just a reminder, these are my policies as far as late papers go. Just a reminder, this is how the grading policies go. And then usually after the first module is over, I'll send out another mass email that says, okay, the first module's over. This is where your grades are at for the first module. Just to give them an understanding of where they're at in their standings in the course. I see pitfalls if you're not specific enough. I see new online instructors where it's a gray area. I'm a qualified reviewer for new course designs, and a lot of times I'll see that as a very gray area, and it's one of the things that I often recommend that they get more specific about. If your grading policy or your late assignment policy is gray, it leaves too much room for interpretation. And again, if you're not seeing a student on a day-to-day basis, or you're not communicating with them on a day-to-day basis, and students are left to interpret things on their own, you have no control as to what they're going to interpret. And then you have nothing to support anything with if they make the incorrect interpretation. So you really need to have those policies very clear, very concise, no room for misinterpretation, so that everybody's on the same page right from the very first day of class.
Excellent. So that is this wrap up of this particular standard. So we're going to now talk about what does that actually mean in the language of the policy. And so first of all, when we're grading, the grade needs to be clear and transparent so students can, for themselves, be able to understand how their grade is being calculated. And that includes any kind of subtotaling or weighting that you're doing in the class, in the grade center. The policies really help students to understand that the way you're grading them is fair and objective. And as you work through the course, once they understand that it's fair, it also helps associate more feelings of belongingness to the course. They trust more in what they're getting in their grade, and they'll put more back to you in feedback and improving their performance overall. Students need to be scaffolded to understand how they're being evaluated and assessed overall. So when we go back to we're going back to that idea of scaffolding, that you need to introduce them to grading, you need to show them where the grades are, you need to show them how to look at the feedback that you give them. They need to understand how the rubrics are being used and how the examples are being used, and then how the grades are being calculated. They need to understand the late policy, all those other policies, right? All that needs onboarding within the course. And additionally, we go back to that idea of clear goals, clear criteria, and we're talking about rubrics, right? We're directly talking about graded activities and the rubrics that are associated with those activities, specifically assignments or activities in the course. Discussions may also fall under this category as well, and that they can understand in your grading that you can see the linking back to the grading policy. You can see the rubrics that are associated with each one of these assessments. They understand the expectations and the guidelines of how you're going to go about grading. And then they understand your turnaround time back to you as well. And again, we go all the way back to Standard 316, where all this goes into the course information or syllabus area in your left-hand menu. So what are the practices we're really talking about? So here's the practices that we're really talking about. We're talking about grade scale, distribution, assessment types, some of the policies around grading, extra credit, and how you're handling collaborative work within the course. Most of this you already have well in hand, no need to talk about the grade scale, but I thought we would take a little bit here to talk about grade distribution and weights and some of the descriptions for assessments. So grade distribution and weights, there's some general rules around developing how you weight your course and how you distribute the points in the course. So it doesn't matter whether you have a teaching mastery course or you have, sort of a gamified course where you're using, mastery points over a certain part of certain levels where they're gaining for certain grade levels. What you want to do is that you want to make sure that you don't load up any one area within the course so that they'll fail the course if they don't pass that. And you can see here, I've developed a little assessment weight table to show you, right? Having 3 assignments at 50%, it's a little bit of a risk, right? That could cause somebody to sort of fail just by not failing that assignment. this is sort of okay because there's 3 different assignments. So the odds of students failing all 3 assignments are low, but you don't want to have, say, 50% of the points in the final exam, right? Because they fail one aspect, they could fail the whole course. You want to make sure that your assessments are tied to your outcomes Bloom's level. So every outcome has a Bloom's level, and you need to be assessing at that same level of Bloom's. And the higher the Bloom's go, the higher the points. So the quizzes and discussions are maybe at a level of understand and analysis or apply, but those assignments most likely are going to be at evaluate and create levels. So they're worth more, so they get more points. The more points an assessment has, the harder students work. And this is from assessment research. Some research have been done where they gave student projects or long-term final projects. And they found that students, the more the worth of something, the harder they work on that. So if you want them to be spending their time in discussions for the course, that's like the real core of the course work that they're doing, either reflection or they're in conversations, then in this scale, right, it's not reflected. The students are going to put a lot of work into the assignments and not necessarily the discussion. So you want to make sure that you're really putting your weight in the right areas. The other thing I did here with the little blue call outs is I get a lot of questions about how to make tables accessible. They get often flagged by Ally in your contents, whether it's PowerPoint or on a document. There's 3 things you need to do to make sure your tables have full accessibility, which is 1, the table requires a title. So this one doesn't have a title, but you would add a title. It has to have a heading row. So all columns need to have a header. And then there's a little property called rows repeat at top under the table properties that need to be checked. That's mostly what everybody's missing, is checking off the rows repeat at top. So that means if the table is split between 2 pages in Word or split in an Excel spreadsheet, that the rows repeat themselves on each different page, and that is for the screen reader, right? So they can manage that. So here's some course mapping, right? When you're thinking about your weight distribution and how your points are set up, we do what's called course assessment mapping. And I can help you with that if you've not been through that before. A lot of faculty here have been through AQ, have done this on their own. It's basically, you're going to assess the Bloom's level of your assessments against your point values. So here I've made a little example. In my course, I happen to have all 6 levels of Bloom. So you may not have that. You may not have like an apply level. So you would just leave that out. So you would have remember, understand, analyzing, evaluate, and create, and you just leave the column for applying out in your table. So you want to match up your outcomes. You might even have like a remember, applying, create columns, right? So it's up to you what your outcome Bloom's level are. Then on the left-hand side in the rows, you put in every single one of your assessments. So I know that's a lot, right? That's a lot of mapping, so to speak, but that's what we do as sort of instructional design. And then we take a look at what level each of these are and take a look at the overall distribution of your point value across the course and to see where I'm actually putting a load for the course. And this basically, I basically assumed it was a sort of a first level entry course where there was going to be a lot of remembering and understanding and really a lot of emphasis on analyzing and applying, right? Because it's a first level course. You may have a couple of evaluating and create, but really you're getting them just used to applying things and analyzing things and contrast, compare, contrast. Just dissecting things, right? That's the applying and analyzing level. And so you can see that I spent most of my points here in those levels. So I have discussions, I have a draft of a paper, I have a midterm, all in this level. And then, my summative assessments, final lab report and final exam, end up in that evaluating a create area, right? Because that's the summative. I'm bringing everything together into those assessments and really seeing whether they have teaching mastery for that. And so you can see those point distributions. Now, if I wanted to put a lot more points in evaluating, right, I want to shift more points to that area or more points to the discussions, right? So this really helps you map out in your course how you're distributing the points across your outcomes, and then how you're weighing the importance of those different outcomes in the course. And I have a resource. I have a course mapping resource, a little template with this example and a little template that I will upload with this recording. So anybody who wants to take a closer look, you can do so in the future, and you can always make an appointment with me or some of the other designers, and we can help you work through your course mapping. It's really good if you're making new courses. This is really one of the first things you want to do there. So in the grade description, so one of the things this standard calls for is really good descriptions of what's the expectations are around grading and around the assessments. And so when you want, what are the things you want to do in your syllabus or in a separate document or even a video for students is to talk about each type of assessment you have in the course and its importance, right? You want to talk about the weight and tell them really what the core of the course is. You want to talk about the quantity and frequency. So they may have 12 quizzes over 12 weeks. You're going to have once a week, right? So you want to let them know what the frequency is for the assessment. You want to give them a general description of it is. Are you giving them essays, right? Their tests, these quizzes, or are they all short answer, or are they multiple choice? Or are you giving them, are you giving a lot of response papers? Are you giving them a lot of lab reports? Are you giving them a lot of problem sets? You want to talk about that. What are you really going to give them? And then are there any special things around them, especially if you are doing testing with Respondus Lockdown Browser? There's quite a lot of you want to talk about with Respondus Lockdown Browser. Or any special notes, like can you have your phone open? Can you have a calculator? What else can you have around you as you're doing your work at home, right? So there's also a page we created for Respondus Lockdown policies and practices. I will also include a link with that with the resources. You're going to also include the date that these assessments are normally due. So you might have an initial post on Thursday and then responses are due by Sunday. You also want to outline the late policy and makeup policy for each assessment type. So sometimes we just do one late policy. You really want to talk about the late policy for each one, because sometimes they're very different. The makeup is very different for the final exam than, makeup on, discussions, right? Most of us say, if you're late in a discussion, that's it. There's no makeup for it because you could just read everybody's response and sort of do that. But you may give a final exam makeup on certain dates, right? So you want to outline that. You want to outline how many days, how many points you're taking off, how many days it's late. And then also for each assessment type, you want a rubric and examples, both sufficient and insufficient examples about those assessments. So you're not going to have a rubrics or examples with tests, of course, but for any kind of assignments, projects, PowerPoints, lab reports, anything that they're actually working on in that evaluate, create area, you want to show them student examples. And you don't have to show them the whole example, right? You want to show them excerpts of examples where the students often go wrong, right? For some of the assignments, you always see the same thing. The students go wrong in the same area, right? So, give them an example of that area and how to work through that. And then you want to tell them your turnaround time. So all this is sort of covered under that description that was talked about under the grading policies. Most of us do this all in the syllabus. Nothing is surprising here, but I'll make sure that I'll have all the resources for you. I do have some articles on flexible late policies. I'm sure most of you have seen them. They were in EPDO. I use them quite frequently about flexible late policies and their impact on students. So we'll also include that. I have also a previously webinar video on rubrics and how to build rubrics. So I'll include that as well. So you can take a look at that if you want to brush up on the 3 different types of rubrics you can build for different types of assessments. Here's just a quick example. A lot of us do those tables, but I wanted just to give you a sort of textual top-down example of a written criteria breakdown. And not everything is here, but you get the gist of that. So you don't have to do tables. You can do sort of more narrative piece or descriptive piece of your quizzes. And these are a lot of the basic things you want to talk about for a description example. So, group work in particular, you want to spend some time on group work. You may want to talk about a peer assessment and how people are going to be assessed as a group and individually. You want to talk about that in the syllabus. I highly recommend making a video where you walk through a PowerPoint where you talk about how they're going to be graded, especially in the collaborative and the discussions. That's where most people get lost and they lose a lot of points because they just missed something. So having the video and the written description, that's universal design for learning. You're giving the students multiple representations to explore in different modalities, different multimedia modalities. So they can, stop, rewind, go back, they can reread things for all the students' needs. So we're meeting student needs at different levels. Here's just the incomplete policy. Quite a few people forget to put the incomplete policy on their syllabus. So you want to make sure you have that. The trick with this is that they have to have 75% of the course complete and passing. When they want to get an incomplete, students often don't know that they need to have a certain grade. They're looking for an incomplete. So make sure you want to, have this in your syllabus. There's different ways that you can reinforce all of these grading policies so that students actually read and watch them, right? Because that's the fear is we look at our data, we look at the data coming out of Blackboard. It's like, oh, nobody watched the video, right? So in order to do that, there's a lot of things you could do to sort of onboard students looking at the grades and looking at the policies through the syllabus. And one of them is a course contract. Some people probably here already do course contracts. And a course contract is, just a document where they sign that they understand and that they are responsible for certain things. And you can do this in a quiz. You could build it in a quiz as well. You can ask them questions about things in the syllabus and then end with a question with, I understand how I will be graded within the course. I understand, what level of mastery I'm going to be held with. I know the consequences of being late, right? You can do this in a quiz or a document. I just had a suggestion here, you can always do it for onboarding, right? So a couple of standards ago, I introduced the idea of onboarding email, onboarding Microsoft Office, right? This is another one of those chances where the first week you are combining your onboarding. So you're onboarding computer labs, Microsoft Office, and the syllabus and the grading policies all at the same time, right? So yeah, one thing is doing multiple scaffolding, onboarding for you. And just again, use those task lists over and over again. We're seeing many of the standards ask for task lists, step-by-step instructions. Same thing with grading. They're asking to see this as a task list that you're providing to the students of how you're going about grading. And then, it's good. These 3 steps here for this example, right? We go back to that idea that we talked about last week and the week before, which is about expectations, setting students' expectation. Here's another way you can onboard, naming file conventions in the course contract. And of course, you're also onboarding the assignment submission, and you're onboarding attaching a file in an assignment and hitting that submission. And I'm also in here, I'm also onboarding this idea of submission confirmation page. So after they submit an assignment, there should be a submission confirmation page that appears to students. You're just onboarding that. So right in this course contract, I'm onboarding like 6 different things with just these 3 steps. So you can take a look at this example. It comes from the University for Central Florida, the Center for Distributed Learning, which is a fantastic design center for them. They're right up there with ASU. So they have a lot of good ideas too. And I'll have a link for you in the resources so you can see the original contract and how they walked through that as well. Another way you can onboard all these grading expectations is through a syllabus quiz, right? You can ask students about how their expectations are set, right? When is the deadline for posting your first response? When is the deadline for quizzes? How long do you have? What is the timing of? What is the frequency of? So you can ask all those things in the syllabus quiz. To onboard them. You also want to ask them about the late policy. What are the consequences for not turning things in on time, right? And have them reiterate them back to you. We know from a lot of research with neuroscience that having students repeat back is a good way to strengthen that neural pathway in the brain, especially if it's spaced repetition over the semester. So you're asking them over and over again these questions, and then of course you want to put in the numbers. How long is the test? How often, how many minutes do I have? Does it auto submit on me? How many quizzes will be there for the semester? How many discussion responses do I need, right? All those numbers they need to know. And of course, feedback. Students do not know how to check their grades or feedback. They're better at checking their grades. We have probably about 60% of students doing that. But only 9% of students actually check their feedback. It went up slightly over the last semester, but 9%. So all the work that you're putting in, they're not reading. So make sure you want to test them. How do you check your feedback? And you could use a hotspot, or you could use matching for some of these in your quiz. So sometimes a syllabus quiz can be syllabus reconnaissance, scavenger hunt. There are other types of syllabus quiz type things you can do. And I have some resource links for you as well that I'll put up with the recording. And so again, talking about that onboarding students feedback, right? Make sure you include the video clips of my grades and of checking feedbacks. And what does that look like? That's one of the reasons why we have that student view in Blackboard. So you can go in and uncheck, erase at exit in your student view. And then you have your preview student, right? So you could take the test as preview student, then go in as the preview student and sort of take a little video of yourself checking your grades and looking at the feedback that you gave yourself, right? So that's a great way to utilize the student view so you can make videos for students. Include feedback in your pre-assessments to know how many students already know feedback. So if you end up with students 100% of students know where the feedback is and how to read it, then you're good, right? You don't have to do that. So make sure that those pre-assessments that you're doing before you begin the class, you're including some of that information about where things are. Alternatively, I suggest, feedback is rough in Blackboard. We have our little inline grader and some of our little editor boxes that we can do. But think about this. Think about setting up the journal tool in Blackboard for the semester. And then after each big assignment where you're giving them feedback, have them post, right? Have them check the feedback and then give them some guided questions, right? The journal is a two-way conversation with students. I know a lot of us don't have the time to meet with students face-to-face, right? Because you have to schedule them and then you have to find the office hours, right, to meet them. So the journal is a really interesting way to sort of cut down the need for the face-to-face with them on Zoom and still have this conversation and rapport back and forth. You can talk about personal growth and as they get the feedback through the journal, they become more and more confident in what they're doing. You can give them kudos, you can show them what they're doing right and how to improve on what they might not be living up for. And that's it. So that's really very standard, standard for this week. There's not a lot of unknown or new. It's just some sort of new techniques for you. There's quite a few resources. So I will be including all those resources for you in all these links when we upload the PowerPoint. So you have those there, some interesting ones there. And then, of course, if you want a course review is available still for OSCQR. There's still time to do that. We have a short turnaround time.